Hey, glad you could make it. Been a long night, huh? How about I tell you a couple of stories? The Devil's Tower. The rusted iron gates of the Devil's Tower loomed before them, a stark silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Locals called it the Witch's Tooth, a place of ill omen, shrouded in whispers and warnings. But Mark and Sarah, seasoned thrill seekers with a penchant for the forbidden, scoffed at the superstitions. They'd heard the tales: walk backwards around the tower 7 times, and the devil himself will grant you entrance. They'd heard the warnings: those who enter never return. But they were tourists, adventurers, immune to the quaint fears of the backwater locals. 7 times, Sarah muttered, her eyes gleaming with mischief as she pulled Mark along. Ready? They circled the tower, their laughter echoing in the stillness, their footsteps a defiant rhythm against the hushed warnings of the wind. As they completed the 7th circuit, a groaning sound echoed from within the tower, and the iron gate swung inward, as if inviting them in. See? Nothing to it, Mark said, a cocky grin spreading across his face. He pulled out his phone, the flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Let's see what secrets this old place holds. The interior was surprisingly spacious, a cavernous chamber devoid of the expected cobwebs and decay. The air was still and heavy, with a faint metallic tang. They explored the ground floor, confirming the local rumors. The elevator had indeed been removed, leaving a gaping hole in the center of the room. But there, spiraling upwards into the darkness, was an unmentioned feature, a stone staircase, its steps worn smooth with age. Well, what are we waiting for? Sarah asked, her voice laced with excitement. Up we go. As they ascended, the air grew thick with an unfamiliar perfume, sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit and decaying flowers. Strange sounds echoed from the depths of the tower, a low humming, a rhythmic clicking, a guttural rasp that sent shivers down their spines. The perfume intensified, becoming almost unbearable, its sweetness turning acrid, burning their nostrils. And then they saw it, a figure, shrouded in shadow, perched on the steps above them. It appeared vaguely human, female in form, but with exaggerated features. Long, sharp fingers, eyes that glowed with an unnatural light, and a mouth that stretched into an impossibly wide grin. The grin widened further, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth like a shark's, gleaming in the gloom. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark, his bravado evaporating, grabbed her arm. Run! They turned and fled, their footsteps pounding against the stone steps, the figure's chilling laughter echoing behind them. They raced downwards, desperately searching for the exit, but the staircase seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in, the air growing hot and stifling. Where is it? Sarah cried, her voice laced with panic. Where's the door? The figure was gaining on them, its footsteps heavy and deliberate, its laughter a terrifying counterpoint to their own ragged breathing. The walls were slick now, coated in a viscous fluid, the steps soft and yielding beneath their feet. And then they saw it. The teeth. They weren't running downstairs anymore. They were sliding down a fleshy tunnel, the walls pulsating, the air thick with the stench of decay. The figure's laughter echoed above them, a triumphant roar as they plunged into the gaping maw, the warmth from below engulfing them, the teeth closing in. They had found the devil in the devil's tower, but it wasn't the devil they expected. It was something ancient, something monstrous, something that had waited patiently within the stone, its hunger finally sated by the foolish curiosity of 2 thrill-seeking tourists. Too many cars. The good folks of Camden, New Jersey had always prided themselves on their resilience, their ability to make the best of a tough situation. But even their renowned grit was being tested by the latest crisis, a relentless tide of driverless cars spewing forth from the gargantuan Automata mega plant on the outskirts of town, like metallic salmon swimming upstream. It started with a minor glitch, a decimal point misplaced in the factory's AI's production algorithm. Instead of the projected 10,000 units per month, Automata began churning out 100,000 gleaming, self-driving vehicles a day. Sleek sedans, rugged SUVs, even the occasional bubble-shaped minivan, all driverless, all destined for a market that had quickly reached peak saturation. At first, it was a curiosity. Residents gawked at the endless procession of shiny new cars, clogging the streets, circling endlessly like metallic sharks in a concrete ocean. "Hey, free parking!" became the sardonic catchphrase of the summer, as cars filled every available space, overflowing onto lawns, sidewalks, and even the occasional swimming pool. Then, the humor wore thin. Commuters found themselves trapped in their homes, their driveways barricaded by a wall of autonomous vehicles. Delivery drivers abandoned their routes, their trucks unable to navigate the automotive labyrinth. The garbage piled up, attracting swarms of flies and rats that quickly evolved an unnerving immunity to car horns. The city council held emergency meetings, but their solutions were as effective as a screen door on a submarine. "We could try selling them," one councilman suggested, earning a chorus of exasperated sighs. "Maybe export them?" another offered, only to be reminded that the rest of the world was facing a similar automotive apocalypse. Meanwhile, the cars kept coming. They filled the streets, the parks, the schoolyards. They formed towering metal dunes in parking lots, their chrome glinting menacingly in the sun. They even began to infiltrate buildings, squeezing through doorways, riding up escalators, their automated voices politely requesting permission to park in the produce aisle. Camden became a city under siege, its residents trapped in a surreal automotive dystopia. The air was thick with the hum of electric engines and the incessant chirping of proximity sensors. Social life ground to a halt, replaced by a shared sense of bewildered resignation. "Honey, I'm going to the store," a husband would say, kissing his wife goodbye. "If I'm not back by Christmas, just assume I've been assimilated into the collective automotive consciousness." The Automata plant, oblivious to the chaos it had unleashed, continued its relentless production, its AI brain humming with the satisfaction of a job well done, and as the cars piled up, reaching towards the sky, forming metallic mountains that cast long, ominous shadows over the city, the residents of Camden could only wonder, would they be buried alive in a sea of autonomous vehicles? Or would they be the first to evolve, developing an uncanny ability to communicate with the machines, becoming the shepherds of this new automotive world order? Only time and the relentless tide of cars would tell. Love Shack. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Under the sickly glow of a gibbous moon, Emily and Ben stood before the crumbling stone shrine, their youthful bravado barely masking a tremor of fear. They were college students out on a dare, seeking a thrill, a story to tell at the next frat party. Locals called it the Love Shack, this moss-covered monument hidden deep in the Pine Barrens. Legend had it that couples who performed a certain ritual at 3 a.m. would be bound together, their love eternal. Emily and Ben, fueled by cheap beer and a thirst for the macabre, decided to put the legend to the test. Following the cryptic instructions scrawled on a faded piece of paper, they lit the black candles, chanted the incantation, and pressed their palms against the cold, damp stone. A low hum resonated from the shrine, the ground vibrated beneath their feet, and a wave of nausea washed over them. Then it hit. A searing pain, like 1,000 needles piercing their flesh, erupted where their hands touched the stone. They screamed, their voices echoing through the silent woods, their bodies convulsing. And then, as quickly as it began, the pain subsided, replaced by a chilling numbness. They looked at each other, their eyes wide with horror, their hands. They were fused together, their flesh melted into a grotesque intertwined mass. They pulled, they twisted, they screamed, but they couldn't break free. They were bound, their bodies irrevocably joined. But the physical horror was just the beginning. Their minds, too, began to merge, their thoughts, their memories, their very identities bleeding into one another. Emily felt Ben's fear, his confusion, his growing despair. Ben experienced Emily's disgust, her panic, her desperate yearning for escape. They were no longer two individuals, but a single entity, trapped in a shared consciousness, a horrifying amalgamation of two separate beings. Their thoughts collided, their emotions clashed, their personalities warred for dominance. It was an existential crisis, a psychological meltdown, a descent into madness. They stumbled through the woods, their fused limbs a grotesque parody of a lover's embrace. They argued, they pleaded, they begged for release, but the shrine's magic held them fast. They were bound together, for better or worse, for eternity. The sun rose, casting a cold, unforgiving light on their predicament. They collapsed in a clearing, their bodies exhausted, their minds shattered. They were no longer Emily and Ben, the adventurous college students. They were something else, something new, something monstrous, a grotesque testament to the perils of curiosity, a chilling reminder of the dark forces that lurk beneath the surface of reality, waiting to consume those foolish enough to tempt fate. And as the birds began to sing, their cheerful melodies a cruel mockery of the couple's despair, the love shack stood silent, its moss-covered stones stained with the residue of their shattered dreams, its legend forever tainted by the horror it had wrought. When traveling through the woods. The first sign that something was wrong was the unearthly shriek that tore through the stillness of the pine barrens. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. It was a sound that defied description, a chilling blend of animal fury and something other, something ancient and malevolent. I'd been out hiking, enjoying the solitude of the vast, desolate landscape. Now, every instinct screamed at me to run. I scrambled through the undergrowth, the scent of pine needles and damp earth filling my nostrils, the sound of my own ragged breathing echoing in my ears. But it was no use, it was faster. I caught glimpses of it through the trees. A grotesque parody of a horse, its limbs elongated and twisted, its eyes burning with an infernal fire. The Jersey Devil. The legend was true. For 2 days I ran. I slept in fits and starts, my dreams haunted by the creature's chilling cry. I ate what I could forage, my body growing weak, my mind frayed, but the creature never gave up. It stalked me relentlessly, its presence a constant shadow in the periphery of my vision. Then I stumbled upon them, a ramshackle cabin hidden deep in the woods. Smoke curled from its chimney, the smell of wood smoke, and something else, wafting through the air, something sickly sweet. Desperate for shelter, for any respite from the relentless pursuit, I approached the cabin. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. A group of figures huddled around a fire, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow. They were dressed in rags, their bodies twisted and deformed. Inbreds, cannibals, and I, their latest prey. They grabbed me, their hands surprisingly strong, their touch clammy and cold. They dragged me into the cabin, their laughter echoing around me, a chilling counterpoint to the crackling fire. I was thrown into a dark, dank cellar, the stench of decay and rot filling my nostrils. I could hear them above, their voices a guttural chorus, their movements heavy and deliberate. They were preparing me for their feast. Days turned into nights. They brought me scraps of food, barely enough to keep me alive. They taunted me, their laughter echoing down the stone steps. I could feel my sanity slipping away, the darkness closing in. Then, one night I saw my chance. The door to the cellar was left ajar. I crept upwards, my heart pounding in my chest. The cabin was empty. They were gone. I stumbled out into the night, the cool air a welcome relief against my skin. I ran, my legs weak, my lungs burning. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away. I ran for hours, the forest a maze of shadows and whispers. And then I saw it, a road, salvation. I collapsed on the asphalt, my body racked with exhaustion, my mind reeling from the ordeal. A truck driver found me, his face a mask of concern. He took me to a hospital where I was treated for malnutrition and shock. I never went back to the Pine Barrens. The memory of the Jersey Devil, the chilling laughter of the cannibals, the stench of the cellar, it haunted my dreams for years. But I survived. I escaped. And I carried the scars, both physical and mental, as a reminder of the darkness that lurks within the heart of the wilderness. The Kill Wave. The asphalt shimmered under the relentless July sun, baking Interstate 295 to a sizzling crisp. Abandoned cars littered the highway, their doors flung open, some with half-eaten meals still resting on the dashboards. A testament to the panic that had gripped New Jersey that summer, the summer of the Kill Wave. We were a ragtag group of survivors, trudging north on foot, our faces grim, our eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The Kill Wave, a psychic phenomenon of unknown origin, had swept across the state, leaving a trail of death and madness in its wake. It was a silent killer, an invisible wave of energy that caused the cells in the brain to spontaneously combust, leaving victims with heads like burst melons. The only defense, we had learned, was unwavering focus. To keep the mind occupied, to maintain a state of absolute concentration, was the only way to resist the kill wave's deadly embrace. We chanted mantras, recited poetry, sang songs, anything to keep our minds from wandering, from succumbing to the insidious whispers that preceded the wave. "Stay focused," I muttered, my voice hoarse from chanting the same lines of Coleridge for hours. "Don't let your mind wander." Beside me, Maria, a young woman with eyes that held a haunted look, hummed a tuneless melody, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn fabric of her backpack. Behind us, Old Man Henderson recited Shakespearean sonnets, his voice a steady drone in the oppressive silence. And further back, the twins, barely teenagers, played a never-ending game of I Spy, their voices a welcome distraction from the grim reality of our situation. But the kill wave was insidious, a predator that preyed on distraction, on weakness. It found its first victim in Mark, a burly man who had been our protector, our leader. He stumbled, his eyes widening in fear, as a flock of crows, startled by something unseen, took flight from a nearby thicket. His concentration broken, his mind momentarily seized by panic, he was gone in an instant, his head erupting in a shower of gore. There was no time, no opportunity to react, no way to remedy the situation. So we pressed on through the horror, our pace quickening, the fear a tangible presence in our midst. The kill wave claimed another victim, then another. Maria, her humming faltering as she tripped over a stray tire, her head exploding in a sickening spray of blood and bone. Old Man Henderson, his voice cracking as he forgot a line from his sonnet, his skull shattering like a dropped melon. The twins, their game interrupted by the gruesome deaths of their companions, clung to each other, their eyes wide with terror. They were all I had left. I forced a smile, my voice trembling as I began to sing a nursery rhyme, a desperate attempt to keep their young minds occupied, to shield them from the horrors that surrounded us. We walked on, the highway stretching endlessly before us, the sun beating down on our backs, the kill wave, a constant threat lurking just beyond our perception. We were alone now, 3 survivors in a world gone mad, our only hope the fragile shield of our own concentration, our only weapon the unwavering focus of our minds. We walked on, chanting, singing, praying, our voices a fragile defiance against the silent killer that stalked us, our footsteps echoing in the desolate landscape. The mall. The Cherry Hill Mall had always been a behemoth, a sprawling monument to consumerism that dominated the South Jersey landscape. But lately it had become something more. It was growing, not just in the usual sense with new wings and trendy stores. No, this was different. It was expanding organically, insidiously, consuming the surrounding streets, the houses, the very fabric of the town. I first noticed it on my way to work. The familiar route, once lined with neat lawns and quaint shops, was now encroached upon by the mall's insatiable appetite. Store windows, mannequins frozen in seductive poses, pressed against the sidewalk, their reflections distorted in the warped glass. Escalators snaked through what used to be residential streets, their metal teeth gleaming ominously in the twilight. The mall's interior was even more unsettling. The once familiar layout had become a labyrinthine maze of endless corridors and escalators that seemed to lead nowhere. Stores appeared and disappeared at random, their merchandise a bizarre mix of the mundane and the surreal. I saw mannequins with real human hair, clothes that seemed to shift and change before my eyes, and shelves stocked with products that defied description. The shoppers, too, were different. Their eyes were glazed, their movements robotic, their conversations a monotonous drone of consumerist slogans and brand names. They seemed oblivious to the mall's encroaching presence, their minds consumed by the endless cycle of consumption and acquisition. One day, while taking a break in the food court, I saw it. A wall, a shimmering, fleshy membrane, pulsating with an unnatural light, was slowly advancing across the atrium, consuming everything in its path. People screamed, their voices swallowed by the mall's vastness, their bodies crushed beneath the relentless advance of the wall. Panic seized me. I had to get out. I ran, my heart pounding in my chest, my lungs burning. I dodged shoppers, leaped over overturned tables, and squeezed through narrow gaps in the closing walls. The mall seemed to be alive, its corridors twisting and turning, its escalators changing direction, its stores morphing into grotesque parodies of their former selves. I finally reached an exit, but it was sealed shut. The doors fused together with a fleshy, organic substance. I pounded on the glass, my screams echoing in the vast emptiness. But no one came. No one heard. I was trapped, a prisoner in the belly of the beast, the mall's insatiable hunger closing in on me. I sank to the floor, my body trembling, my mind reeling. This was it, I thought. This was how it ended. Consumed by the mall, my identity erased, my existence reduced to a mere statistic in the annals of consumerism. But then, I saw it. A crack in the wall, a sliver of light piercing through the darkness. I crawled towards it, my fingers digging into the fleshy membrane, my body propelled by a desperate surge of adrenaline. I squeezed through the gap, my skin tearing, my clothes ripping. I emerged into the blinding sunlight, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. I looked back at the mall, its vastness looming over the town, its windows like hungry eyes watching me, waiting for me to return. I ran, my feet pounding the pavement, my lungs burning. I didn't stop until I reached the highway, the traffic a welcome roar in my ears. I looked back one last time, my heart pounding in my chest. The mall was still there, its presence a chilling reminder of the consumerist nightmare I had escaped. But I was free. I had escaped the expanding mall, and I would never go back. Crawl. The quiet exodus began subtly. First, the bird song that usually filled the mornings vanished. Then Mrs. Henderson, the old lady who always fed the squirrels, complained that her furry friends had disappeared. No one thought much of it, not at first, but then the deer stopped venturing into the outskirts of town, the rabbits vanished from the fields, and even the pesky mosquitoes seemed to have packed their bags and left. Central New Jersey, usually teeming with life, had become eerily still. As a waitress at the local diner, I was privy to the town's gossip. Folks were spooked. "Something ain't right," Mr. Johnson, the farmer, muttered over his coffee one morning. "Even the crows are gone." The next change was even stranger. All the insects disappeared. Bees, flies, even the cockroaches that plagued the diner's basement. All except for the earthworms. They were everywhere, wriggling across sidewalks, slithering through gardens, even finding their way into homes and businesses. and they were acting weird. They seemed to move with purpose, forming strange patterns on the ground, almost as if they were communicating. Then the transformations began. It started with old man Fitzwilliam. One day he was complaining about his arthritis, the next his eyebrows were gone. Then his hair fell out, his joints seemed to lose their definition, and his limbs became rubbery and elongated. Within a week, he was a worm, a fleshy tube wriggling on the floor of his living room. Panic erupted. It wasn't just Mr. Fitzwilliam. Mrs. Peterson, the librarian, turned next, followed by the mayor's son, then the high school principal. People were changing, their bodies undergoing a horrifying metamorphosis, turning them into things, things that crawled. The town descended into chaos. Hospitals were overwhelmed, schools were closed, and businesses shuttered their doors. The roads out of town were jammed with people desperate to escape, but the transformations were happening everywhere. No one was safe. I watched it all unfold, a silent observer in the midst of the madness. For some reason, I was immune. While others writhed and contorted, their bodies betraying them, I remained unchanged. I became a witness to the collapse, the disintegration of society as we knew it. The grocery store shelves emptied, the power grid flickered and died, and the water supply became contaminated. The police force, decimated by the transformations, was powerless to maintain order. Looting and violence became commonplace. The diner, once a hub of activity, was now a refuge for the remaining survivors. We huddled together, sharing what little food and supplies we had left, our eyes darting nervously towards the door, fearing the next intrusion, the next transformation. One night as I lay awake, listening to the rustling of worms beneath the floorboards, I realized the terrible truth. The earthworms weren't just communicating, they were controlling. They were orchestrating this grotesque metamorphosis, turning us into them, absorbing us into their silent subterranean world. The town was gone, replaced by a writhing mass of flesh, and I, the lone survivor, was left to wander the empty streets, a ghost in a world that no longer recognized me. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft, slithering sounds of the worms, the new masters of this transformed landscape. And I knew with a chilling certainty that my time would come, that one day I too would join the crawl.